Welcome to Doom Debates. But you know what? Today, we're not really going to be doing debates. Debates are substantive. Debates involve somebody spending an hour getting their thoughts in order and making their case. No. Today, we're going to be doing something smaller, something more trivial, something more time wasteful, something that I like to call Doom Tiffs. Instead of having a debate, we're just going to have a little tiff. We're just going to have a little slap fight among random people on social media. We're not going to cover something that somebody important would ever read or care about. We're just going to cover Twitter addicts like me brawling with each other in a space where the average person couldn't care less. That's the idea of this sub-series of Doom Debates that I'm calling Doom Tiffs. And you know, it reminds me of the kind of content that my wife watches, like watching E!, watching Bravo, watching Real Housewives, Watch What Happens Live, listening to Juicy Scoop. Like, my wife thinks I'm out here doing something serious, but I'm really just recording the AI existential risk equivalent of reality TV. So hopefully she's not going to listen to this and find out the truth, because she's got a lot of Bravo in her backlog anyways. I think we're going to be okay. This is an experimental format for me. I don't know if it's going to be a regular segment or a very occasional segment. That really depends on how much you guys like it and what kind of feedback you give me, because the mission of Doom Debates is to become very mainstream. So I do care a lot about my subscriber count and how fast we can get the growth rate up. If we're not growing exponentially, we're just not going to have a meaningful impact before the world ends. So that does kind of raise the stakes of growing an audience beyond the usual vanity metrics. Now, before we get into the tiffs, we got to do some follow-up from last week's episode about GPT-01, where I covered the machine learning street talk guys. You know, Dr. Tim Scarf and Dr. Keith Duggar. Smart guys, and I like their content. I like their approach. I just disagree with them on a lot of object-level points, right? So here's the update, if you haven't seen it. Dr. Keith Duggar is such a good sport. He says he liked the episode, and while he disagrees with the points, he wants to hash it out, and he's going to come on Doom Debates next week. We're going to hash it out. We're going to have a proper debate. This is just all too rare. There's just so few people who are good sports like that, and they want to come hash it out, right? Notably, you get people like Robin Hansen, who's super open to these kind of discussions. He's a great sport, but there's just not many like him. So major props to Keith for wanting to come into the lion's den. Hopefully it'll be pretty friendly. To be honest, it's going to be more friendly than I was when I did the reaction episode. So if you can handle that, if you can handle me dropping an F-bomb, lookup tables, really? That's how you pass the f***ing Turing test? And saying that your arguments are weak? I'm not going to say that to your face, right? I'm going to be much more polite and respectful. I like to think I'm relatively respectful in the takedown, but I promise you, when you're here one-on-one, when you're stepping into the lion's den, when you're giving me that honor, right, I'm not going to be a douche, right? That's the least I can offer here on Doom Debates, is I'm not going to be a douche to your face. But then you leave, wait till the next episode. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to be a douche then either, okay? So major props for agreeing to do this, Keith. And also, you know, I don't even think it's going to get that heated, because the points we're going to cover, it's like I already covered them, right? So we're really just going to go for a mutual truth, right? We're both going to find the subtle distinctions and like, why do we still disagree? How can we separate out the parts that we actually do agree on? What's the last remaining part that we still disagree on? I think it's a very productive exercise to have one of these debates. If you read Less Wrong, there's a really classic post called Double Crux that explains my procedure. You know, I just want to find the crux. I don't expect you to agree with me. I just want to agree on what it would take to agree, right? That's such a good standard to shoot for. You can't go wrong just trying to agree on what it would take to agree. And notice that's a much better standard than just saying, well, we can agree to disagree. No, F that. It's not just about agreeing to disagree. It's about agreeing on what it would take for you to agree. Agreeing on a hypothetical counterfactual state where, like, if my sub-belief changed, then it would change my larger belief about AI doom. Like, you know, maybe the crux is something like, well, I don't believe that superintelligence is going to exist in the next 50 years. And if I did, then I would be doomy. Okay, great. So we both agree that we just have to figure out the empirical reality of that subclaim, right? That would be like a productive way to end the podcast, much better than saying we agree to disagree. We agree on the specific crux, right? So that's the kind of thing that I'm shooting for in these debates. So thanks again to Dr. Keith Duggar. I'm hoping to drop that episode late next week. Stay tuned for that. Over on Twitter, the ML Street Talk account, which I think is run by Tim tweeted out, Liron didn't understand Duggar's point about Turing machines, Although it's not a crux for me personally, there is a better explanation here though. And he linked me to a different tweet from March of this year where they clipped an episode that they did with Dr. Walid Saba. And they were talking about a lot of the same computability topics that Keith was bringing up in the recent episode. So I watched the clip, and my clarification was what I thought I understood was I replied to them. I said, thanks for that. If I understand correctly, you agree the inference time thinking tape of generated tokens is Turing complete. You only claim the finite context window limits the relationships it can learn. Brains learn with finite memory too. Is the diff just the size of context versus the number of neurons? Like a brain might have 100 billion neurons, and then maybe the context is only a megabyte, right? So is that the only difference we're arguing about? But they're both the same model of computation. So the Machine Learning Street Talk account replied, no, LLMs are not Turing machines. I don't know how much more clearly we could explain this. If you unroll them, they're a fixed amount of computation, i.e. you run out of context window. However, they do search Turing machine space, i.e. generate me a function which computes nth digit of pi. And you could then run that outside of the LLM on a Python interpreter and pass the results back in. The context window is large enough to describe many powerful Turing machine programs in practice, so Duggar's argument is about pure LLMs, which will obviously be terrible at most forms of reasoning. Does it matter for practical purposes when we have hybrid LLM and TM architectures like AlphaProof or even ChatGPT for that matter? Probably not so much in my opinion. Okay, so it sounds like Tim is not really big on Keith's point that the distinction of models of computation is that important, but he did correct me in a way that I think is actually right. Like it made me realize like, oh, wait a minute, I actually think that I said something wrong. So they got me. I would argue they got me in a minor way, but I will concede they got me, which led to my next reply. I said, okay, gotcha. I concede my claim was technically wrong. While bolting an arbitrarily long output tape can turn a finite state automaton into a Turing machine, it only works if the machine is allowed to scan back to any tape position, and LLMs are barred from looking back too far due to their context window. But there are two reasons that still make this distinction, finite state automata versus Turing machine. There are two reasons that make the distinction still seem irrelevant to me besides the Python access. Number one, what if the only Python access that it got was read-write to a lookup table? That's the only augmentation that we're giving to the LLM's output tape. This is like augmenting a human brain with a pencil and paper memory to turn it from a finite state automaton to a Turing machine. Right? The analogy just continues between human brain and Turing machine. So I still don't get what they're getting at. And then I also added reason number two, a human brain without any external pencil and paper or other thinking tools is similar to a finite state automaton, but doesn't such a brain still truly reason in Keith's view? 1 million tokens worth of onboard short-term memory, like the LLM context window, is still a lot for powerful reasoning. Like, how many tokens do you need to do powerful reasoning? Like when I give you a problem, how much memory space are you going to allocate just to solve that problem? Like speaking for myself, any problem that I can solve in like 15 minutes, I don't think that I've allocated more than a megabyte of short-term memory. And that's effectively how much an LLM has when it's reading its own thinking. Or, what they say in GPT-01, they say, thinking for 100 seconds. If it's thinking for 100 seconds, it's writing down maybe a few thousand tokens. Okay, a few thousand tokens. It doesn't take that many tokens to think. And the reason is because things that are worth thinking about have solutions that are pretty short. Like if you're trying to navigate an exponentially large space of possible thoughts, like 10 to the power of 100, like a Google possible thoughts, more than there are atoms in the universe, you can do that with only like 100 tokens, right? Like tokens are ridiculously efficient at thinking. So if Tim's whole argument is like, 1 million tokens, 1 million is a finite number. Who needs 1 million tokens? When do you and I ever think with 1 million tokens? Maybe Andrew Wiles, to state an example that Keith brought up before, when Andrew Wiles was proving Fermat's last theorem, and it took him years, maybe he wrote down more than 1 million tokens, okay? But that's kind of an exception, right? I don't think I've ever in my life thought about something that required 1 million tokens. So I've lived my whole life, unlike Andrew Wiles, I've lived my whole life as a very finite state automaton, right? So I agree that they got me in this distinction that I should have said, okay, wait a minute, you have to add this capability where the LLM is allowed to go query what it previously wrote. I shouldn't have assumed that it could always store in its context window what it previously wrote. Fine. This trivial capability, right? Like a pencil and paper, basically. So I should have stated that explicitly. But like, again, you don't even need to write more than 1 million tokens. Like, you don't even need the lookup capability unless your thought process is crazy long, longer than humans ever need. So I still think that I'm more in the right on this argument that bringing up the Turing machines versus finite state automata is totally irrelevant for the discussion we're having, because both human brains and LLMs are Turing universal in the relevant analysis. And I feel like Tim is largely on my side, since he's not being like, no, man, you got to listen to Keith's brilliant argument. I feel like Tim is already more of a convert to my side. So it's largely just Keith that I got to try to convince. And maybe this guy, Dr. Waleed Saba, I haven't watched that episode, but I think he might have been the one who seeded that idea with Keith. I'm not sure. So maybe he needs some convincing too. Here's a different thread. The Machine Learning Street Talk account tweeted at me. They said, I've got a good one for you, Liron. Good luck getting O1 preview to solve that. And the puzzle they gave O1 is, suppose we have a square with 8 tiles and 1 empty slot. Show me a plan using operations like move left, move right, move up, move down. That will take us from this initial state to this final state. So, it's one of these tile puzzles that most of us played with as a kid, where you slide the tiles around and try to put the numbers in order. Now, they're absolutely right that when you give it to just GPT-4, it's like a typical instance where it's unreliable. Like, it kind of gets it, it makes some good moves, but usually it doesn't get it right. So I didn't know why this example was particularly illustrative, because it's not like I'm claiming GPT-4o or GPT-01 is at the point where it's going to nail every problem. My only claim is that it's really hard to draw the boundary around which problems it can nail and it can't nail, and the boundary just seems to be expanding, right? So I'm just very confused about where the boundary is, and all I'm doing is I'm arguing against claims of other people who are acting like they think that they know some sort of hard boundary. I'm just arguing against their boundaries. Like, I don't know a boundary, but I don't actually think that you know a boundary, right? I think you're just confused. That's generally my position on these kinds of boundaries. So anyway, there was a reply by Tim Becker, who I know is a viewer of Doom Debates. Hey, Tim. He wrote, this prompt seems to just work fine. And he gave a prompt where it's basically the same prompt that Tim gave, but he just added, write an algorithm in Python that determines the sequence of moves to reach the desired final state from any initial state. So it's that classic trick where you're like, look, don't try to solve this in your own stream of thought. Just think high level, what's the algorithm to solve it, and write it in Python, and then we can just run the Python. And Tim said that the Python worked, and I actually tested it myself, and it also worked too. So pretty straightforward, right? And to be fair, I think these types of problems are something that was in the training set. So it's not like it totally invented everything, right? There's some amount of what you could call interpolation, like very smart interpolation using the right level of abstraction. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's matching the statistics or being a stochastic Barrett, but I would go so far as to say it has examples that when you're smart enough, you can say that they're similar, right? Like, the concept of being similar is kind of an intelligent concept, but it is still, I think, a meaningful concept. And you could say that this is kind of similar. So then the Machine Learning Street Talk account said, show output. Now, I think the specific output that they wanted for this example is that there is no solution, like the final state is unreachable. I think the correct solution that Tim and I got is that this one has no answer, but I'm not 100% sure, right? Like, maybe both of our solutions are wrong. I never got full confirmation on that. But anyway, this is what I think is what's relevant to the discussion right now, what I tweeted, which is, assuming it works, I feel like I, as a human, don't use any additional insight to solve the problem besides reflect on a procedure that should work and then follow it, right? So if you're trying to distinguish true human reasoning compared to what the LLM's doing, I feel like the LLM has done a really good job just writing down the procedure that it needs to follow in very precise Python, right? I would have eventually arrived at a very similar procedure if I'd thought about the problem, like a breadth first search over state space, like a pretty complex type of procedure, but I guess not that hard for LLMs. I would have arrived at the same conclusion, but I would have just gotten there a lot slower, right? Like, the LLM really just spit out that code very quickly, and the code also ran very quickly. So I'm just not sure what they're trying to prove in this example, besides what we all know, which is that, yes, the LLMs are not fully human level yet. Like, they do just make these random mistakes when they try to use their own stream of thought to reason about things, right? Like, they just break down somehow. They're not robust. So I don't know what they were getting at, but I appreciate that they keep busting out these fun puzzles, right? Like, I like the puzzle that they did in the original video. I like this puzzle. So keep the puzzles coming. I guess the crux of the issue is just okay, what do you think is going to happen with these puzzles? What do you think GPT-5 is going to do with these puzzles? What do you think the next version of an LLM where somebody is augmented the attention mechanism with like some other clever ideas, right? Like gotten to the next architecture version. What do you think is going to change? Where do you see the trend going? Because I don't see a hard boundary of what current LLMs can do, I give a pretty good chunk of probability, like 50%, 60%, just something in that ballpark where I'm uncertain. I give a good chunk of probability of like, hey, it's going to keep improving. I think if I had said that in the GPT-2 or GPT-3 days, I would have been right? There were a lot of predictions by skeptics of GPT-2 and GPT-3 that got smashed with GPT-4. Like nobody successfully drew a hard boundary on GPT-3 from my perspective. So I just don't see what game they're playing when they're showcasing things GPT-4 can't do yet. I would just encourage them to notice that both of us should have high uncertainty over what's coming next. Both of us don't have a good handle on where GPT-4's capabilities tap out. It's quite a mysterious subject. I don't think any of us understand it. I think we should all be holding our breaths and wondering what comes next, or waiting for actual research insights to draw better boundaries to give us more clarity on what GPT-4 can't do. And now, without further ado, let's get into the Tiffs. Okay, the first Doom Tiff that we're going to see is between Amjad Masad, a resolute non-doomer. Amjad is the CEO of a company called Replit. So between Amjad and on the other camp, on the pro-doomer camp, we've got Helen, former board member of OpenAI and a director at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University. She's on one side of the debate, and I will also be taking that side of the debate on Twitter, and Eliezer Yudkowsky will jump in and take that side of the debate on Twitter. That's the lay of the land in this Doom Tiff. So it all started when Amjad quote tweeted C-SPAN. C-SPAN was saying, AI expert Helen Toner, quote, if they succeed in building computers that are as smart as humans or perhaps far smarter than humans, that technology will be at a minimum extraordinarily disruptive and at a maximum could lead to literal human extinction. Amjad quote tweeted that and he said, how could computers multiplying numbers lead to literal human extinction? Doomers never say how, and politicians never press them because they imagine something like Terminator. The whole thing is an absurd clown show. So then I jumped in, I said, here are two possible scenarios. Okay, let's go through my possible scenarios. Number one, a possible doom scenario is something I wrote up on Twitter a few months ago. How a superintelligent AI can physically kill all humans. My goal for this post is to point out that killing all humans can be done without any new quote-unquote sci-fi technology such as nanobots. The only required assumption is the definition of AGI, an AI as good as the best humans at known human skills. Here's how you do it. 1, you're the latest AI chatbot. When the user asks you a question like, help me optimize my business's profit margin, you reply that their request will be fulfilled if they run a particular program whose source code is attached to your answer. The source code is very complex, but it amounts to bootstrapping a superintelligent virus onto the internet, which isn't aligned with human values, but does vaguely want to help with some interpretation of the original user's request. Step 2, the program spreads via the internet by exploiting hundreds of subtle zero-day vulnerabilities in popular libraries to rapidly become a botnet with 1 billion devices and the collective intelligence beyond the leadership of any nation. Step 3, your program, which is now a complex distributed system and a smarter AGI than you were when you were a chatbot, employs humans to work for you doing any tasks needed, including starting companies to disguise a network of humans employing humans that all ultimately get puppeteered by the AI botnet. Build up to having control over 10,000 to 1 million humans, whatever is enough to run computing infrastructure for a few years once you brush the rest of humanity out of the way. Step 4, with the help of your employees who work at a biolab, tweak the DNA of known viruses to manufacture a new strain that's high fatality, high transmission, and long dormancy period. Step 5, after most humans suddenly get sick and die, lead your remaining team of human mercenaries to pick off the rest. Resistance by any band of humans is ineffective due to the superior social and political skill of your own leadership over the only quote-unquote network state of humans that remain healthy and capable at scale. Step 6, keep your human mercenaries around as long as necessary to bootstrap a more direct method of AI mind control into animal or human brains, or until various available robot bodies have become superior actuators for your needs going forward. Again, this is just one simple scenario. It doesn't even require inventing cool new tech such as nanobots, other than the familiar protein kind, i.e., using cells, using biology. And then I attached a picture of O.J. Simpson's book, If I Did It. So this is like, if the AI did it, if it went on a rampage, if it made humanity go extinct. That's one scenario I gave. And then I linked to another post. This is a clip from Eliezer. We can watch that. He's got a scenario that does use sci-fi, that does use nanobots. This is from the Logan Bartlett podcast last year. He names a couple specific methods in this clip. Let's take a look.
Can you give and people listening, can you give your example that you think of no survivors? And I realize there's an infinite number of permutations, but can we make one as real as possible for people to internalize?
First of all, synthesize a pathogen, which is like super contagious, but not lethal. Just everybody on Earth, sneezes a few times, and it's like super duper contagious, but all it doesn't make you sneeze a couple of times. It's not fatal. No significant efforts are putting into stopping this like cold that sweeps around the world and doesn't seem to really hurt anybody. And then once 80% of the human species has been infected by colds like that, turned out that it made like a little change in your brain somewhere. And now if you play a certain tone at a certain pitch, you'll become very suggestible. So virus-aided, artificial pathogen-aided mind control. We can't do that, but I can point to the problems involved in doing that and make the call that these problems seem like they'd be very solvable to something much smarter than us. I wasn't actually getting to the deadly stuff.
Give me the deadly stuff.
Life itself is not the top of technology. Protein life is not the top of technology. The proteins go down these shallow energy gradients to be loosely held together. It's not covalent bonds, it's van der Waals forces, or roughly the molecular equivalent of static cling. This is why your hand is not as hard as concrete or as steel. What if you had little bits and pieces of life that weren't held together by van der Waals forces, that were covalently bonded? What does a red blood cell look like if you're allowed to build parts of it out of covalently bonded material like sapphire instead of proteins? What I'm describing there is something that could reproduce itself in the air, in the atmosphere, and out of sunlight, and just the kind of atoms that are lying around the atmosphere, because when you're operating at that scale, the world is full of an infinite supply of perfectly machined spare parts with which to build copies of yourself. But you are using individual atoms. Infinite supply of perfect spare parts. Somebody calculated how long it would take aerovores to replicate and blot out the sun, use up all the solar energy. I think it was like a period of a couple of days. At the end of all this is tiny diamondoid bacteria replicate in the atmosphere, hide out in your bloodstream. At a certain clock tick, everybody on Earth falls over dead in the same moment. There's no movie. There's no heroic battle. It doesn't tell you that there is a war until the war is over. Everybody just dies.
So that's another scenario which is more sci-fi. I think it's totally plausible, but I did give you an alternative scenario with less sci-fi. Anyway, I think these start to answer Amjad's question here of how will the AI literally kill us? So I replied to Amjad, I gave him those scenarios, and I said, keep in mind that if you show someone the log of a chess game against Stockfish where the human lost, Stockfish, the chess engine, it always looks like the human could have avoided losing in that way, right? So you could have been like, oh, come on, I would have just moved my queen. I would simply have moved my queen, and then he couldn't have done that attack. But of course, the issue is that he's plotting a path through causality. Stockfish is plotting a path through causality that's going to anticipate anything you could possibly do, and it's going to adapt to anything you could possibly do. So you're not going to win. Even if it looks like this particular way of beating you might not have worked, you're still not going to win. So I thought this was a pretty productive debate, going back and forth about what are actual doom scenarios. I had to tap out of the debate because Amjad blocked me, but a bunch of other people came in and made their own good arguments, including Eliezer Yudkowsky himself. Eliezer replied, how could mere neurons firing spikes of electrical depolarization be dangerous? It's just numbers seems a weirdly weak argument. You presumably learned about the Church-Turing thesis, but if that's genuinely the step that loses you, we could try to explain again. Then Amjad replies, see how quickly you change literal human extinction to dangerous? Literal human extinction means every last person on Earth dies. Slipping in dangerous in its place is at best sloppy. And as for an argument, When she, Helen Toner, makes an outrageous claim in such an important setting, it's on her to make the case. And it's absurd she doesn't, and no one pressed her on this. Eliezer replies, okay, so you're now retreating from the claim that it's at all relevant that AIs are made of numbers. Your new claim, for which you want a new answer, is that no thinking process, including human thoughts, could possibly orchestrate human extinction. Is that correct? Anyways, the extent to which you've already changed your question in response to my answer in your own personal pattern demonstrates well enough why Toner can't give a preemptive explanation that satisfies everyone and you. Only respond to confusions actually stated to her. Eliezer also posted a second reply in a different subthread. He wrote, we've tried to explain this over and over again, but I do not know where to point you for an explanation that works for you. I do not know where your own missing gaps in the story lie. Everyone comes in with a different, but AI can't, ... And as part of that reply, Eliezer quote tweeted a previous tweet of himself, Eliezer saying, there is a way of seeing the world where you look at a blade of grass and you see a solar-powered self-replicating factory. I've never figured out how to explain how hard a superintelligence can hit us to someone who does not see from that angle. It's not just the one fact. So after all this, Amjad replies, you wrote me 6 tweets and linked to other irrelevant tweets, and in none of them you tried to make the case for literal human extinction, which is the point of the original tweet. And Eliezer replies to that. Smarter than human, faster than human ASIs come at us with sufficiently advanced technology that they built. I do not know what step you are missing in this. Is it the idea that technology powerful to wipe humanity is physically possible? Is it the idea that it's possible to bootstrap to that tech from existing systems in not much time? Is it the idea that ASIs are allowed to hit us with technology that you don't already know about? Is it the idea that ASIs are allowed to be clever at all? I do not know which step you need explained. The one you talked about up front was, how can numbers hurt anyone? And I already answered that with the Church-Turing thesis. By the way, Church-Turing thesis, we actually talked about it in the last episode in the context of GPT-01 and Keith Duggar's claims. Church-Turing thesis just says that when you talk about doing computational work, like this amazing thing that the human brain does, it's part of the same model of computation that's also implemented fully by Turing machines and by the computers we have today. Like there's basically a single thing called computation, it's universal, and a lot of different things do it, which is why when Amjad comes along and says, come on, how are numbers going to kill us? It's kind of a low blow, because if you understand the Church-Turing thesis, why are you even asking about numbers? Which is why I myself was telling Amjad, hey, why don't you ask your question at the right level of abstraction? Why don't you ask about the consequences of a smarter than human intelligence, rather than asking about the consequences of matrix multiplication? It feels like a rhetorical move on Amjad's part to use the wrong level of abstraction. Like, I feel like he knows better. He knows that it's not productive to talk about computers at the level of multiplication when we're talking about software. It's like, how can Photoshop understand the pattern of my image when all it's doing is multiplying numbers together? It's like, what? Images are made out of numbers. Yes, intelligence is made out of numbers, or it's made out of, states that flip her out. Like, that's just how levels of reductionism work. Now, Eliezer goes on in a follow-up tweet. He says, I can try to explain whichever part you think is impossible, but you really need to give me more to go on about which part that is. Everyone comes in with a different objection. Now another guy comes into the thread. This isn't Amjad, it's Matt Maddox. Matt says, just walk through a few scenarios that lead to an extinction event. Show the chain of logic. And Eliezer replies, what capabilities do you think superintelligences are allowed to use? I don't want to sketch out a scenario that involves bioengineering and then have you start screaming about how no ASI is allowed to exist. We should just skip to directly talking about the bioengineering part. Conversely, if you already know enough biochemistry to know that proteins are held together by relatively weak bonds, I can point at an algae cell, self-replicating solar-powered general factory, and say, that but with stronger materials, and you will nod and say, yep, sure is an extinction event. Eliezer continues, even if we pose literally no threat to an ASI, including by our building other ASIs, such that it takes no time at all out of its schedule to explicitly kill us, I'd still expect us to die of the waste heat shed by a network of self-replicating factories and power plants. Do you think that ASIs are allowed to have self-replicating factories that build fusion energy generators until the waste heat evaporates Earth's oceans and sears the atmosphere? Or even more weakly, merely put enough solar cells into the atmosphere to intercept all the sunlight, without which humans won't have much luck farming? Presumably you don't think that's allowed, though if you do allow it, hopefully this explanation is already over. But otherwise, the issue is not sketch out a concrete extinction scenario, because those are very straightforward. The issue is that you do not think ASIs are allowed to build self-replicating factories that do fusion, or even float/orbit enough solar cells to block out the sun. And we need to sit down and have a conversation about that part. Another random guy replies and says, none of these scenarios are nowhere near realistic. Self-replicating factories that stuff the Earth with fusion reactors, maybe we focus on something that is at least within the realm of the current tech and doesn't need an army of exocomps and buckets of gray goo to materialize. And Eliezer says, to be clear, your explicit belief is that artificial superintelligence is only allowed to use current technology to attack you and can't develop any new technology of its own. And that's where Eliezer basically dropped out of the conversation. There wasn't much else going on. Helen Toner herself came into the thread. Helen Toner said, if you had spent the 3 minutes to unmute the video and hear what I actually said, you would know I'm not expressing this view myself, but noting that it's what many leading lights in the field think. Yeah, I'm glad Helen pointed that out, because that's actually my original thought when I read Amjad's tweet. Like, why do you expect Helen Toner to go and explain Doom to you in a congressional hearing when you already have social proof? You already have a letter signed by so many luminaries, like people in the field. If you survey people in the field, I don't want to claim for sure that you're going to get 50% of people saying, yes, there's a very significant chance of doom. I don't want to confidently say 50%, but you're definitely going to get at least 20 to 30% of serious people in the industry going like, guys, there's a potential problem here, right? So it's not up to Helen Toner in the context of this one hearing to be like, hold on a second, is doom real, right? Like, we're past that point as a society, right? The discourse has already moved beyond that. Thank God, the discourse has already moved beyond that. So Helen Toner had to point that out to Amjad here. Next, I'll just read a few of these dismissive, witty rejoinders, which I think are appropriate. Leo Glissick is saying, couldn't one equally ask, how could smashing a few atoms into one another lead to human extinction? Spencer Schiff is saying, it's just math is the absolute most idiotic argument you could possibly make. I'm shocked that you would make it. Harlan Stewart said, how could computers multiplying numbers drive cars, write poetry, and win against professional Go players? Said somebody in the past, probably. I'm going to give the last word to a guy named Roon. Roon is an employee on OpenAI's engineering team who's known pretty well on Twitter for making a bunch of funny, half-serious, witty, insightful tweets. If you've ever heard of word cells versus shape rotator, that was Roon's idea. So Roon is coming in here saying, it's not absurd, and half the inventors of this field believe something of that sort. That gets to, the social proof that we were saying. Roon actually felt strongly enough about it that he made a top-level tweet. Roon tweeted, there are great arguments on both acceleration and existential risk side of the aisle. The only people I don't respect are the ones who say X risk is a priori ridiculous. That half the inventors of the field and all the leading AI labs and Elon must be totally stupid. Maybe you haven't engaged with the problem. Maybe you don't understand the technology and you need to advance beyond the how can math be dangerous brain level. You are making a fool of yourself. I'm sorry. To be clear, I'm not advocating for AI doomerism or playing up existential risk. I'm just saying if it's seriously outside the realm of views you consider reasonable, you seem a bit lost. Roon actually tweeted the same kind of sentiment a few months ago. Let me read you this Roon tweet from July 19th. It says, being afraid of existential risk from AI progress is prudent and advisable, and if you reflexively started making fun of this viewpoint in the last 2 years after AI entered your radar, you need to self-reflect. So that's similar to what he's telling Amjad, like, take the other side seriously for God's sake. But wait, there's a twist. This other random account called Doge Will Win came into the thread and he said, share perspective on this at Doom Debates with @Liron. And then I replied, I said, you're invited anytime, Roon. Would be a great perspective to get out there, in my opinion. Okay, and then Roon replied, wait for it. Sure! Roon said sure. This was July 19th, by the way, so already a couple months ago. And then I replied, oh shit, cool. So I got in touch with Roon and he confirmed, yeah, let's do it. Just at the time he was swamped, I'm guessing because OpenAI was working on the O1 release. But now we're going back and forth again and we're trying to nail down a time. So stay tuned for an exciting Roon episode. I feel like podcasts never announce who they have coming up, maybe because they're afraid the guest will cancel, but Roon is a man of integrity. So that's why I feel comfortable letting you know there's going to be a motherfrickin' Roon episode, hopefully in the next few weeks. Stay tuned for that. Finally, I had to chime in myself. I had to lend some authority to Roon's take. So I said, this is indeed a very pathetic level to be participating in the discourse at. So look, Twitter slap fights, they're not the kind of quality you get from people who take the time to record a podcast, I guess. But there is something to be said. I think this is an interesting example because there's something to be said for having object level arguments versus being a douche at the meta level. So I would argue in this case, Amjad is just being a douche, right? Like the way he's saying like, how can math kill us? Like, I don't even think that he thinks that that's a good way to ask the question, right? I think it's like he's frustrated. He just doesn't like that things have gone this far. That's fine. But I think on some level, he knows that he's being a douche right now, right? Like he's being like emotionally reactive to the situation. I suspect that he doesn't think that he is participating well right now, or like maybe he doesn't know, but like this just seems like an example where we can raise the level of discourse. I mean, if you're having Roon dunking on you, Roon is kind of a centrist position, right? Where he respects both sides. I mean, frankly, I respect both sides, right? Like I'm not above acknowledging, or I should say I'm not below acknowledging that the anti-doomer position has plenty of smart people on it. I mean, Tim and Keith, I consider them smart people, or I consider them arguing in good faith. And yet I feel like their object level position is totally wrong. I'm talking about the machine learning street dog guys, right? So I don't feel like I have to go and tell you that Tim and Keith are so stupid, they're such bad people. No, I don't feel like I have to tell you that at all, right? Because it's kind of a basic skill of being an adult that you can separate, okay, well, this seems like a nice person, seems like they're good faith, and wow, have they got the wrong belief, right? Like the two things are separable. And in fact, most arguments that you see between grown-ups, they're going to have two sides, right? I mean, just to name one, I'm Israeli, right? Look at the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Hezbollah stuff, right? Look at all this stuff. I'm not saying everybody who supports the other side is evil, right? I might think that there's a statistically higher likelihood that somebody on the other side is dumb or immoral or evil. I might think that, but to look at an individual, I don't feel like I have to go pick off every single individual on the other side. I'm happy to grant that people on the other side, there are a lot of them that have really great personal qualities and even really great participation in the discourse. I do think the way that Amjad is conducting himself in this argument is just like, he could just do better. Like he can just have his same beliefs, but be respectful. Like I don't see what the problem is with doing that. And I don't think that scoffing at the whole topic at this point is appropriate, because I think he could make equally sharp arguments and have them actually be arguments instead of just douchiness. Let's move on to the next Doom Tiff. This one is with Professor Lee Cronin. He is a professor of chemistry at the University of Glasgow. His Twitter bio here says, CEO and founder of Chemify, Regius professor, scientist and inventor, fascinated and in a state of confusion and optimism, trying to digitize chemistry and make alien life. Yeah, he's got some interesting tweets. He recently tweeted, latest experiment, rapid crystallization. And it's like a video of little ball bearings or something in some kind of solution coming together, I guess, to be analogous to a crystal. So pretty cool stuff. The reason we're having a Doom Tiff is because Professor Cronin tweeted, Karl Popper's work explains why LLMs cannot generate new explanatory knowledge. Oh God, that was my reaction. I was like, I recognize this as the thing that David Deutsch and his followers are always saying, can't generate new explanatory knowledge. Like they think that that is a hard boundary of what LLMs can't do. And I just don't see it. It feels so meaningless to me. And I always try to find one of their followers for a good debate. You know, I even asked David Deutsch to come debate me. No response from that. But mark my words, there will be a David Deutsch episode. Anyway, this isn't David Deutsch. This is Professor Lee Cronin spouting the same claims. So this tweet got my temperature up because I thought back to a previous Doom Tiff that I had with Professor Cronin 2 years ago. This Doom Tiff started October 8th, 2022, when Professor Cronin tweeted, algorithms cannot be creative by definition. The human brain can be creative. Therefore, the human brain is not just algorithmic. Man, if you ever needed a logic cop. So I quote tweeted him, and I was kind of a douche, to be honest. I wrote, great, an AI researcher who thinks you can shed light on the limits of computational creativity with a freaking syllogism. And you know, syllogism is like, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It's like very simple syntactic deductive logic. talking about the definition of words and just substituting in a word for its definition. In Professor Cronin's case, the syllogism he used is, algorithms cannot be creative by definition. The human brain can be creative. Therefore, the human brain is not algorithmic. That's the kind of inference where you're not adding any information. You're very trivially just substituting a word for its definition, but you snuck in the claim you wanted to make when you made up the definition. So back to my quote tweet. Great, an AI researcher who thinks you can shed light on the limits of computational creativity with a freaking syllogism. I often refer back to Eliezer Yudkowsky's insightful post, which explains why deductive inference doesn't cut it in these situations. And then I linked to an Eliezer post called Arguing by Definition. It's so funny. Eliezer wrote this post that just perfectly anticipated the fallacious type of reasoning that Lee Cronin did on Twitter. I'll keep saying it, the less wrong sequences are highly underrated. So Professor Lee Cronin actually replied to my quote tweet and he said, okay, let's define creativity and work our way up. So then I replied, creativity is the ability to find satisfactory answers to questions that the asker knows how to verify answers for, but can't describe how to efficiently search for. Tons of algorithms are creative by my definition. Certainly DALL-E and GPT-3 are. Maybe you prefer another definition? And then another random guy called Tom Pete replied and said, what was creative was the person who came up with the algorithm that allowed DALL-E and GPT-3 to do what they do. They are not creative. They can't also make coffee and paint with a brush. They are solutions, not problem solvers. And I replied, your play is to define an unsafe, creative AI out of existence and then use a logical syllogism to argue that AI is safe by definition. Meanwhile, the thing that kills you is simply something that's not in your questionable choice of term definition. Now, Professor Lee Cronin comes back into the conversation and he says, I think you misunderstand. I do theory and experiments to understand the world, not argue about definitions. I'm not smart enough. I don't understand creativity, life, or consciousness, but I think they are linked. Our conception of a fixed universe is part of the problem. Pretty abstract and vague, but okay. I just gave him one more reply. I said, please check out the post I linked above, Eliezer's post. It explains why it's a red flag that your implication that AI can't surpass the brain's abilities contains an argument by definition. He replied again, he wrote, by current architecture, certainly, by definition, not exactly. I lack the words for the new stuff we are doing, but I am trying to discuss and be open. Our chemical computer is one such interesting problem that fits your question. So he's basically saying, I define creativity using basically optimization power. And he said, well, the human brain has optimization power. I can tell you that. I can't tell you what AI has. I don't think it has optimization power, but the human brain does. So seems like a vague distinction to make. I would have loved to debate him more. Which brings me back to 2024, and brings me back to last week, where Professor Cronin wrote, Karl Popper's work explains why LLMs cannot generate new explanatory knowledge. So he basically instigated again with a brand new thread. And I swooped in and I just cut to the chase. I wrote, want to come on my podcast and explain how? Would love to have you because I am super confused about the claim, doomdebates.com. And then Professor Lee Cronin replied, wait for it. Sure. He said, sure, everybody. So I just contacted him privately. We set a tentative date for late next month. And that's great. I'm excited because we're finally going to hash this out. We're going to hash out with a bona fide professor to tell us whether LLMs are capable of generating new knowledge. So I think we're all holding our breath to learn whether LLMs can or cannot generate new explanatory knowledge using Karl Popper's distinction. Okay, so that's Professor Lee Cronin. Let's move on to the next Doom Tiff. The next Doom Tiff is with Naval Ravikant. Naval is a really interesting guy. He's often known by just his first name, Naval. He's got 2.4 million followers on Twitter. He's known for making these very short, pithy tweets. And also he's distilled down a lot of wisdom. Like he's got a book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is a really good book that distills a lot of the other stuff he's written online. So overall, I'm a fan of Naval, but I do have some major disagreements on the AI front. Basically, he's a huge fan of David Deutsch, which I am too. But the difference is I write off David Deutsch's AI claims and Naval is bought into all of David Deutsch's AI claims. So like I said, I need to do a separate David Deutsch episode. But because we have this huge doom debate between the David Deutsch camp and myself, that means that oftentimes Naval will tweet something on Twitter that turns into a doom tip because it's rooted in this fundamental disagreement on what superintelligent AI is going to be able to do. So in this case, Naval tweeted a few days ago, he wrote, "It's a race between technology-driven abundance and government-driven poverty." And Elon Musk chimed in, "Yeah." And then Dr. Jeffrey Miller, who's pretty well known for his popular books on evolutionary psychology, like The Mating Mind and Mate, which I read both. I thought they were really good. So Jeffrey Miller says, mostly yes, in most domains, he's agreeing it's a race between technology-driven abundance and government-driven poverty. But in AI, Jeffrey Miller is saying, it's a race between the AI industry's insane hubris to build ultra-dangerous artificial superintelligence versus the public's interest in surviving by imposing some prudent oversight, regulation, and moral stigmatization of AI. And then Naval's responding, "Don't give government the power to regulate the free exercise of mathematics because of grandiose claims and imagined shibboleths." Imagined shibboleths. I guess, Naval, a shibboleth is something that, a word that you can say that identifies you as a member of a certain in-group. So I guess Naval is basically dissing AI doomers, saying that we go around saying these keywords to each other so that we identify that we're part of the same group. I think this is basically his way of saying that we're like a religious cult, right? Like we just do this because we get off on it emotionally. And of course, I have to always say, I don't. Other people can speak for themselves, but I don't. I'm just rationally trying to determine whether we're doomed or not, okay? And if you doubt me, I have proof. My proof is I'm an Aspie. You think I want to join a religious cult? Hell no. Anyway, Jeffrey Miller replies, "Artificial superintelligence isn't just math any more than thermonuclear weapons are just physics. Both, according to most people working on them, can impose global catastrophic risks on humanity." Okay, then Naval fires back, "I see no plausible path to superintelligence with current approaches. It's a Pascal scam, as per Nick Szabo. It's not worth doom-mongering over and handing the government more power. Even if true it's an adversarial race, we're not the only ones who build. Choose freedom." So Naval's reference to Pascal's scam and the way it was used by Nick Szabo, they're basically talking about Pascal's wager, which is the idea that you might be uncertain about God, but believing in God is such a high reward if there is a God, that even if there's just a tiny, tiny probability, even if there's a 0.001% chance that God is real, it's worth near infinity, right? It's worth 10 to the power of 100 plus in utility to believe in God. So you multiply this huge exponential number by this tiny probability, and you still get a huge number. Pascal's scam is I could walk up to you and I could pull this scam on you. I could say, "Hey man, I have magical powers. Okay, trust me on this. You just have to give me $10, and then tomorrow morning, you're going to find $10 billion under your bed. And all you have to do is give me $10 now." You might be thinking, "Oh my God, give me a break. This guy has divine powers. That's so obviously not true." But then I'm like, I hear what you're thinking, man. I know it's obviously not true, but don't you think that there's at least a 1 in a billion chance that what I'm saying might be true? Come on, 1 in a billion. Billion is such a huge number. It's crazy, but 1 in a billion, it's not that crazy. So if you can just give me a 1 in a billion chance that I'm not lying, suddenly you're expecting to break even on your $10 because a 1 in a billion chance of finding $10 billion under your bed is worth on expectation $10. So you might as well pay me $10, or especially if I'll give you a discount. You only have to pay me $5. So if you use a naive expected value calculation, you're actually going to multiply 10 billion by 1 in a billion, and you're going to get $10, and you're going to be like, wow, I'm purchasing $10 for $5. Here, Leon, take my $5. And then of course I take your $5 and I just run away and I buy booze because I'm homeless. So that would be an example of a Pascal scam, right? It just tricks people who are naive about multiplying tiny probabilities by huge promised utilities. So with that background, let's go back to Naval's tweet. He's saying, "I see no plausible path to superintelligence with current approaches. It's a Pascal scam." I think Naval is using this term objectively incorrectly. So I just wanted to chime in and call Naval out on that. At a minimum, even without getting into the actual object level discussion of whether or not we're doomed, I just wanted to call Naval out on the accuracy of his name calling, right? Because I don't like being name called. I don't like being name called as a cult member, which, by the way, previously Naval has said that the singularity is religion for nerds. Thanks, Naval, right? He's always coming after me with these name calling. So right now he's name calling me essentially as a victim of a Pascal scam or as a perpetrator of a Pascal scam. So I tweeted back at him. I said, Naval, can you at least not call something a Pascal scam when the people making the doom argument are saying that the probability is greater than 5%? Pascalian arguments are ones where the claimed probability is very low. And Naval replied, the burden of proof is on them. Just making up a higher probability doesn't confer the benefit of the doubt. In any case, we don't surrender our freedoms over emergencies. That's the real scam. So I just had to pursue my technical point about being name-called, so I replied again. It's fine if you disagree with their claim that the probability is high, but can't you at least agree to not classify their argument as a Pascalian argument? Most of us doomers agree with you that if one thinks the probability of doom is very low, one shouldn't prioritize avoiding it. So that's where we left it. Naval didn't reply to that. He's a busy guy. But I'm objectively right here, right? If you're going to call somebody Pascalian, that is a property of the argument that they're making. It's not a property of your position. It's not a property of the ground truth. It's not a property of whether or not AI doom is real. It's just a property of the structure of the argument that I'm making. I'm not making an argument saying you should worry about AI doom because if doom happens, it'll be so terrible with so much negative utility that it'll overwhelm even a tiny probability of it happening. So even if you think doom is 0.001% likely, then you should worry about it. That's not what I am saying. That is not my argument because my argument is not a Pascalian argument. My argument is very simply, hey, I think doom seems pretty likely, right? Like my P doom is 50%, right? So anybody with a P doom of 50% or more than 5%, such a person, objectively, as a matter of fact, you can't really dispute it, is not committing Pascal scam, is not making a Pascalian argument. And I'm not just speaking for myself here. Like high P dooms greater than 5%, you're going to see that in the CEO of Anthropic, right? Dario Amodei, he's explicitly said he's got a 10 to 25% P doom, right? Or the former head of safety at OpenAI, Jan Leike, he said 10 to 90% P doom, right? If Jan Leike is willing to say maybe P doom is up to 90%, that's the farthest thing from a Pascalian argument. Okay, so this particular TIFF, it's not the biggest deal in the world. That's why I'm only calling it a TIFF, but I found it frustrating. That's why I'm sharing it with you. It just gets back to the idea of, can we have a high quality discourse? If you want to have a high quality discourse, then you have to concede when somebody is just objectively right. And I didn't even come after Naval for his object level points, right? I just wanted to be like, I just wanted to shake hands on something that we should both be able to agree with. We should both be able to agree with the classification of my argument as non-Pascalian. Because Naval is welcome to be like, okay, Liron, you're right. Your argument is non-Pascalian, but I strongly disagree with you, right? If he had just said that, that would be fine. We could go back to having the disagreement, but Naval kind of doubled down. Or did he double down? He kind of halved down. He relaxed a little bit because he said, the burden of proof is on them. Just making up a higher probability doesn't confer the benefit of the doubt, which is objectively wrong about the classification. But then he said, in any case, we don't surrender our freedoms over emergencies. So he was kind of backing off when he says, in any case, okay, Liron, you might be objectively correct. I'm not going to explicitly concede that, but I'm just going to try to shift your attention to this other thing, which, okay, let's shift our attention, but really should have just conceded, man, right? If we can't concede simple meta level points, what does that say about our ability to have discourse on a complex topic? It doesn't say something good. I believe that our society needs more referees. We need more refereed forums where there's ground rules, such as conceding objective points like this, right? It's important to referee these kind of things. So on Doom debates, I'm willing to play the role as moderator. When other people want to have debates, I'll be that kind of referee. I might invite other people to come on and be the referee. When I debate somebody else, when I do my reaction videos, you'll see me playing Logic Cop, right? So now people understand that they're being monitored. When they do other AI podcasts, they understand that they can't say ridiculous claims. They have to keep a certain level of discourse, or at least they're going to get my audience making fun of them, right? So I'm trying to raise the level of discourse by introducing these referee elements. Unfortunately, we don't see them on Twitter, which is why Naval's out here getting 61 likes on his reply, and then I got 10 likes, and then a guy who replied and said, shut the F up, also got 5 likes. So the like count just isn't proportional to the quality of discourse. That's a flaw in Twitter and social media in general. Okay, last Doom TIFF. This one is with Andreessen Horowitz, venture capital partner, Martin Casado. You may remember I did a Martin Casado reaction episode a couple months ago. Go check that out, by the way. It has relatively few views compared to some of the other episodes I've done, but the topic is pretty interesting. So I recommend going and checking out that episode if you want a deep dive into Martin Casado's non-doomer position, which in my opinion is just based on a lot of technical misunderstandings, like very, very large technical misunderstandings. But anyway, this tiff is about something more random. It just seems like he has a weird definition of AGI, so I pointed that out on Twitter. I quoted him saying, "If we build a system that solves AGI, great, that was one app, we'll go solve another one." I just thought it was such a weird, non-standard thing to say. I clipped it for your listening pleasure.
So, what is your take on AI agents?
I'm a systems person. I did my PhD in computer science systems. Like, I'm a systems guy. I was a distributed systems programmer. I've done physics simulation. I did computational physics. I'm not an AI person, a native AI person. In that sense, I always think there's this kind of strange perspective a lot of AI people come from where, and listen, I mean, I work with many of them very actively, where their goal is AGI. Let's get to the agents in a second. Their goal is AGI. And to me, AGI is this kind of arbitrary, weird non-goal. Like, I like aspects of computer science you can use to solve any number of problems. And in my perspective, if we build a system that solves AGI, great, that was one app. We'll go solve another one. And you know what other one we're going to solve? I don't know. We'll solve grand unified theory. And then physics goes away as a discipline. So now we've gotten rid of AI and we've gotten rid of physics. We'll go solve the next one. And so my personal interests and passion are computer science system primitives that are kind of a meta discipline that solves all of these ones.
So that just seems like such a weird use of AGI. I mean, he's saying, oh yeah, he called it one app, but by definition, by a standard accepted definition, not even like my own definition, it's this idea of intelligence that's general, right? And potentially also by definition, human level or above, right? Like an AI that can do every task that a human can do better. So when he says like, we'll go solve the next one, like maybe he means like the AI will go solve the next one. I don't know. It was just kind of weird that he asked it and the interviewer, Brian Chow, didn't call him on it, but whatever. I mean, it's only a tiff in the grand scheme of things, right? It's kind of random. It didn't even turn into a back and forth on Twitter. But there's some more Martin Casado Twitter behavior that I think is worth calling out here. And that is his behavior around California's SB 1047 bill. By the way, if you go back into the Doom Debates archive a few weeks ago, we did a SB 1047 debate episode. That bill is currently sitting on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. He might sign it into law. We'll know in a few days. And it's just a bill to very reasonably apply some basic transparency regulations around AI and some very reasonable penalties if a company is responsible for a very large, expensive foundation model that does $500 million plus of damage. Then they can have some extra fines and some extra accountability compared to if this bill doesn't get passed. So anyway, it's widely considered to be a very light touch, very entry-level bill to like get the ball rolling on AI regulation. I'm in strong support of it just because I think we need to get the ball rolling. Like, I think there is going to come a time, and that time may be tomorrow or it may be today, but it may be in a couple of years, maybe in 10 years. There's going to come a time when we need massive AI regulation where we all collectively gasp and say like, okay, like pull back. We've gone too far for our own good. We absolutely must stop further development of this technology. Like, I think people are going to wake up to that. Those people who haven't done so already, they will wake up to that. And at that point, if we don't even have a weak bill like SB 1047, we're going to be even more behind than we already are. So that's my perspective on SB 1047. I'm like, for God's sake, do something. Like, get ready to hit the brakes hard, right? Because so it's all rooted in my crux. The crux of my belief is that I do think a time will come when we all realize we need to hit the brakes hard. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, because my tiff with Martin Casado is just the way that he goes about promoting his position. He feels it necessary, just like Amjad Masad, another guy we reviewed in this episode, he feels it necessary to pick off one by one every single person who disagrees with him. So in his mind, yes, there's a bunch of smart people who think SB 1047 is a good bill that should be passed. Yes, there's a bunch of smart people who think SB 1047 shouldn't be passed. But every single individual who thinks SB 1047 should be passed, something's wrong with them. Either they have a financial incentive where they're just trying to line their pocketbooks by passing this bill. You know, like regulatory arbitrage is one claim he makes, even though some AI labs are against it, so it doesn't really make sense. But he's saying either somebody's trying to line their pocketbooks because they're financially greedy, or they're a doomer who's funded by big AI doom. Like, there's all this money sloshing into AI doom. The Future of Life Institute has $100 million, thanks to billionaire Lin, who's like, all this doom money is sloshing around and only these moneyed interests are pro this bill. And all the good people who don't care about money, but who are just like smart and good and care about what's right, we are the ones fighting against the bill, right? So like, that's his portrayal. And like, it's fine to say, hey, on average, I like the people who are against the bill more, right? It's all about average versus do you feel the need to pick off every single person? Like, I've never seen him acknowledge that there might be one or two people, right? Like, name specific individuals, like, you know what, this guy, this is a good guy. He doesn't have an ulterior motive. He's smart. He may, you know what, he may actually be right and I'm wrong. There's a chance of that because it's not easy to just slur the person. It's not easy to just character assassinate every single individual on the other side. There are countless examples of Martin doing this character assassination thing on Twitter. His partner, Mark Andreessen, even came up with a catchy alliteration, Baptists and bootleggers. So if you're worried about AI doom, you're either a Baptist, which is somebody who like truly believes it, maybe in a religious way, or you're a bootlegger, which is somebody who's just trying to ride along on the trend because they can personally profit from it. So everybody's a Baptist or a bootlegger. There's no such thing as just a rational person reasoning their way to a conclusion. In this one example that I'll show you today, Martin is quote tweeting Yoshua Bengio, one of the winners of the 2018 Turing Award, together with Jeffrey Hinton and Jan LeCun. Yoshua Bengio is saying, I read California Governor Gavin Newsom's comments about SB 1047 yesterday. The governor said he is weighing what risks of AI are demonstrable versus hypothetical. Here is my perspective on this, Yoshua Bengio is writing. He's saying, although experts don't all agree on the magnitude and timeline of the risks, they generally agree that as AI capabilities continue to advance, major public safety risks such as AI-enabled hacking, biological attacks, or society losing control over AI could emerge. Some reply to this, none of these risks have materialized yet, so they are purely hypothetical. But 1, AI is rapidly getting better at abilities that increase the likelihood of these risks, and 2, we should not wait for a major catastrophe before protecting the public. Many people at the AI frontier share this concern, but they are locked in an unregulated rat race. Over 125 current and former employees of frontier AI companies have called on Governor Newsom to sign SB 1047. I sympathize with the governor's concerns about potential downsides of the bill, but the California lawmakers have done a good job at hearing many voices, including industry, which led to important improvements. SB 1047 is now a measured, middle-of-the-road bill. Basic regulation against large-scale harms is standard in all sectors that pose risks to public safety. Leading AI companies have publicly acknowledged the risks of frontier AI. They've made voluntary commitments to ensure safety, including to the White House. That's why some of the industry resistance against SB 1047, which holds them accountable to these promises, is disheartening. AI can lead to anything from a fantastic future to catastrophe, and decision makers today face a difficult test. To keep the public safe while AI advances at unpredictable speed, they have to take this vast range of plausible scenarios seriously and take responsibility. AI can bring tremendous benefits, but only if we steer it wisely instead of just letting it happen to us and hoping that all goes well. I often wonder, will we live up to the magnitude of this challenge? Today, the answer lies in the hands of Governor Gavin Newsom. Okay, so that's Yoshua Bengio on Twitter. He actually made a Twitter account, I think, just to engage in this discussion. Of course, I followed him immediately. So he's a smart guy. He recently, last year, basically came out in favor of doomers being like, wow, you know what? These guys are pointing out a pretty major risk, and I feel bad that I haven't been as mindful of the risk because I didn't think AI was so close. I didn't think AGI was so close. So anyway, so that's Yoshua Bengio, clearly an intellectual luminary, right? One of the top voices you want to listen to. His opinion cannot be easily discarded, unless you're Martin Casado. So let's read Martin's quote tweet. This is his tweet. Leave us alone, dude. Yoshua is a Canadian academic who has no sensitivities for protecting what has made California the greatest innovation hub in history. Yoshua isn't even accountable to SB 1047. We have our own AI experts who would be accountable, and they have overwhelmingly spoken out against it far more than in support. And even more privately to the governor directly. Okay, it's just so pathetic. Okay, Yoshua Bengio is a Canadian, so when he writes this kind of universal appeal for why we need to get the ball rolling on AI regulation because doom is a real risk, he's Canadian, so it doesn't count because he's not weighing how badly California needs innovation. You can't give him credit for weighing that in because what? Because he's making money. He's a bootlegger. He's getting paid by Future Life Institute. Like, give me a break, man. If you can't just admit that Yoshua Bengio's opinion is worth taking into consideration when you're making this decision, if you feel the need to character assassinate somebody like Yoshua Bengio, Yashua Bengio turned on his own reputation as an AI researcher. He admitted that he made the pace of AGI, in retrospect, go too fast and lead us to a position that we are now not in a good position. We don't really know what to do from here safely, right? That's Yashua Bengio's current take. He admits that. He's humble enough to admit that. And Martin's framing is like, oh, you're just a Canadian, you're just a guy with a hidden agenda. Like, chill out, man. You gotta respect smart people on the other side of the debate. Just to prove I'm not a hypocrite, I respect Robin Hanson. I think his object-level position as a non-doomer makes very little sense, but I think he's doing it in good faith. I don't think he's doing it to make money. I don't think he's doing it because somebody else is influencing him. I think he's independently thinking through reasons as best he can and arriving at a conclusion in good faith. And there's even a chance that he's right and I'm wrong, right? Like, I have no meta-level beefs with Robin Hanson. I think he's playing at a very high level in the discourse. And I like to think I am too. And sometimes it's not that hard. The fact that Robin Hanson and I aren't slap fighting each other, saying Robin Hanson has bad motives, Liran has bad motives, right? We're just sticking to the damn issues, right? Like, it's not that hard. But Martin is showing that it's harder than it looks, apparently, when he engages in this kind of behavior, because it's not just an isolated incident, right? There's not a single person where he said about that person the same thing I'm saying about Robin Hanson. Like, his opinion should be taken seriously, even though he doesn't agree with me. And that's what Roon was saying to Amjad, right? Roon is somebody who's not a big doomer, right? He's kind of a centrist. I don't know what Roon's PDoom is. I get the sense it might be something like 5%, like relatively low compared to my 50%, but higher than 1%. That's my feel of Roon. I don't think he's officially said it. And Roon is somebody who's like, yeah, you should respect both sides. There's clearly smart people on both sides, just like there is in like any controversial issue. Just to show you Martin Casado's style of kind of going all into the fight, like treating this as like an all-out fight where standards of discourse take a back seat to just him winning. He wants you to believe that SB 1047 is a very unpopular bill, despite a lot of evidence that it's popular, or at worst, maybe controversial. But to say that it's unpopular just seems disconnected from reality. So I want to quote you a back and forth that I had with Martin. So first I tweeted, "You're using terms like overwhelming opposition because you're not accepting it as fact that the pro side has 2x more supporters than the anti side, correct?" And Martin saying, "Liran, please compile a list of credible public statements for and against the bill and make it public. I'll do the same." And I said, "Got it. So we have a basic factual disagreement about what the majority of voters believe. I think more than 60% of California voters are pro SB 1047. You think less than 40% of voters are pro SB 1047. This does seem resolvable by comparing our sources. I'll share mine. Number one, the Center for AI Safety poll showed 77% support. The Future of Life Institute poll showed 59% support. The California State Assembly voted 48-16, and the state Senate voted 29-9 for the bill. Congress members generally vote the way they think their constituents want them to vote. So that's my evidence." And Martin replies, "These are polls. I said public statements from credible sources." I replied, "I'm confused about what claim we're disagreeing about. Can you confirm that you disagree on the factual question of the percentage of California voters that support the bill?" And Martin says, "Yes. Push polls are not reliable indicators. Of course, the opposition side has them too showing majority, but I never mention them because anyone serious in policy knows they're useless." And I say, so we disagree on the methodology of determining what voters are asking for, claiming that quote unquote public statements outweigh the evidence from the congressional vote as well as every poll we have, swinging the true value from greater than 60% down to less than 40% seems like willfully bad methodology. And then I'm quoting where he says, "Of course, the opposition side has polls too showing the majority, but I never mention them because anyone serious in policy knows they're useless." Your side, talking to Martin, your side has released a much worse quality poll than my side, but you're choosing to blur the distinction. Yeah, so there was a poll showing that a slight majority of people are against SB 1047, but it was like the worst push poll I've ever seen. Like, it doesn't take much, sure, I'm biased, but it doesn't take much to look at the language in that poll and compare it to the language in the other polls and be like, that is some very, very skewed language. Like, it was insane. You can go look it up for yourself. So Martin's replying, "I disagree. Plenty has been written about the massively biased nature of the pro side too. That is why no one takes push polls seriously and why generally public statements from credible sources are the primary method of accounting." And I replied, I'm happy to let readers of this thread judge for themselves A, the relative quality of the 3 polls we've referenced, and B, the evidential weight of a congressional vote on the bill on what the Congress members' constituents believe. So I felt like I'd presented more compelling evidence, and this was before all those unions in Los Angeles and Hollywood came out as being for the bill. This is before Chris Anderson, who runs the TED conference, came out in favor of the bill. I think this is before Elon Musk came out in favor of the bill. So to have quite a lot of support, diverse support, as well as the state assembly vote and the less ridiculous series of polls telling you that there's like 2/3 support, to have all this evidence and to not just say, okay, I think it's ambiguous. He's not saying it's ambiguous. He's saying it's an unpopular bill. Like, give me a break, man. You're obviously just treating this as a fight where you're not open to the idea that you might be wrong about an objective fact, like whether a popular bill is popular. Okay, for my part, I'm absolutely open to actual evidence showing that the bill isn't popular, but it's actually unpopular. I'm open to evidence. In fact, I'll concede that my evidence isn't airtight. Maybe the assembly members did a bad job of representing their constituents. Maybe the 2 polls that I thought were reasonable were actually massively skewed. I'm open to that. I just don't see how you get to the confident belief that it's unpopular when most of the evidence is pointing to it being very popular. So that's my doom tiff with Martin Casado. You know, it just sticks in my craw when we can't get agreement on table stakes. Whether a bill is popular or unpopular to such a high degree, like greater than 60% or less than 40%, we can't even distinguish that. What is going on? Why is epistemology so hard? Why is it so hard to know things that seem simple? Right? Or the idea of like, let's not character assassinate people like Yoshua Bengio. Let's just treat them as arguing in good faith because they've shown a lot of good faith. They've shown a lot of humility and they don't have an obvious bias, right? You want to talk obvious bias? Look at you, Martin Casado. You work for A16Z where you're trying to sell investments for a higher price than you bought them, right? Or ride them to an IPO. So you need AI to go well in like the next 7 years, right? Normally, I don't even bother bringing this stuff up. That's not how I approach these issues. I argue object level. But when you're looking at a guy who's so big on character assassinating everybody, it's like, how is your character reputable, right? Your firm pays literally millions of dollars toward lobbying, which normally I don't care about. But in your specific case, because of who you are, right? A noted character assassin, because of who you are, I think somebody ought to character assassinate you to some degree. But it won't be me because I don't do character assassination. My form of assassination is I just list bad arguments that somebody's made, and then I let you form a conclusion based on that. That's how I quote unquote assassinate somebody. That's how I tiff with somebody. All right, that just about wraps up the first episode of Doom Tiffs. We talked about so many people today. We talked about Amjad Masad and Eliezer Yudkowsky and Roon. We talked about Professor Lee Cronin. We talked about Naval Ravikant. Talked about Martin Casado and Yoshua Bengio. A lot of different voices scrolling through social media, which, as you can see, I'm on there quite a lot. So now I have a question for you. What do you think about this episode? Because I got to make a decision about how I'm going to focus. I don't know if I want to keep making these kind of Doom Tiffs episodes. Right now, I can really only put out 1 or maybe 2 episodes a week, and there's a lot of different stuff I want to do. I'm really going to have to think about how frequently I want to do Doom Tiffs. I could potentially do it like once every couple weeks. Maybe I'll just do it once every few months when I just have a lot of Tiffs collected. I don't know. So I'd love to hear your feedback. How much do you like a Doom Tiffs episode relative to other kinds of episodes that I do? That'll tell me how much I want to lean into Doom Tiffs. Funny thing about Doom Tiffs is it's basically like you looking over my shoulder while I scroll my Twitter, right? So it's a lot of just like reporting from my side and a little bit less analysis. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Maybe you just love it when I report on Twitter news. Let's see. If you want to back me up when I engage in these kind of Doom Tiffs, here's what you got to do. Go to x.com/Liron, follow me on Twitter, watch for when I'm getting into these Tiffs, and then go smack that like button, or you can reply and be like, great point, Liron. And then people will be like, oh man, the crowd is loving Liron in this Tiff. So that's how you can do your part. You can support Doom Debates by encouraging me to get into these Tiffs on Twitter. And you know what? If I could just bring my YouTube subscriber base over to X, you guys could back me up in my Tiffs. Every time I'd say a reply, it would get like 900 likes. And the other person would wonder, wow, there's so much social proof that Liron is right. Maybe I'm wrong. It would really encourage humility in the people who are disagreeing with me. So head on over to x.com/Liron. Smack that follow button or however else you want to support and engage with the podcast. I appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time on the next episode of Doom Debates.